Okay, so it's time is 3 minutes after 12 noon. Thank you everyone for joining us on this like muggy, steamy, sunny day, or maybe not. I'm not in Boston, so it's difficult to say. Anyway, this is meeting number 3 in our series of teaching and designing your online course. And would like to introduce Professor Amy Todd. Amy is a senior lecturer too in Anthropology College of Liberal Arts. So Amy was originally trained at UMass Boston in biological anthropology. And as a graduate student at the University of Arizona, she developed an interest in socio-cultural anthropology in Mexico. She completed her dissertation at Brandeis University on urban markets in southern Mexico. She has been returning there to do fieldwork, teaching and visiting friends in the community since 1996. So almost 27 years. So Amy has been teaching biological anthropology at UMass Boston since 93 and peoples and cultures of Latin America since 2002. In 2009, Amy developed both classes for online delivery via Blackboard for summer and winter sessions. And the online modality made her work-life balance easier and allowed her to visit Mexico while teaching and allowed her to further her interest in teaching technology. So she equally enjoyed teaching introduction to biological anthropology and peoples and cultures of Mesoamerica, Mexico, Guatemala, online and in the classroom. So here we are. Let's welcome Amy to this conversation and to this, to all the people in the classroom. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Irene. Hi, everybody. It's great to see people here during the summer. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you some of my experiences teaching fully online classes. I prepared a little presentation, so a slideshow, just to keep myself organized with my thoughts. I've been teaching, as Irene said, I've been teaching online now since, I had to go look it up, but since 2009. And even before that, I relied heavily on or not heavily, but I did rely on technology quite a lot. I have been purging really old emails of mine from 20 years ago. And I guess I used Google sharing methods to share articles and things like that, and a lot of email and sharing assignments electronically. So I think I was kind of an early adopter of teaching fully online, in part because I was already taking advantage of technology in the classroom. And the classes I teach online fully, and I'm actually teaching both of them right now, I also teach fully on campus. So I do both things. And since the pandemic, my fully on campus classes are kind of de facto hybrid because students are Zooming in and everybody's getting COVID, including me. So I, all that to say that I don't, in my own mind, make a huge separation between the online modality and the on-campus modality. I do, obviously, there's some pretty big differences, but I also see them, for me, informing each other a lot. And, there's a lot of overlap between my classes. I use the exact same course site for Introduction to Biological Anthropology, whether I teach it online or on campus. And the same with my course about Mexico and Guatemala. Just one thing I do want to say, one of the things that I've been doing for a long time is using open source material in teaching. And that was one of my early motivators for using technology a lot, was because it made it easy to share resources and links with students, which, as I used to do via email and other, before I had the chance to use an online platform. I've also taught online I taught for a while at Brandeis University. I taught in their professional school for graduate studies, and I taught fully online classes there using a totally different platform. So, okay, so if I think I can share this screen, I'll just share this, but I do want to say that if people have any comments or questions, feel free to just interrupt. Nobody needs to be polite, and I'm not necessarily going to see chat, so just feel free to unmute your microphone. Okay. So can people see the slide that's up there? Okay. All right. So, it's always interesting to do a presentation that comes with the title, because it made me stop and think, well, what do we mean when we talk about student engagement? And so I had a whole bunch of questions, and maybe we could start with just if anyone has any answers to these questions. So what does student engagement mean at all? Are there different kinds of engagement? What challenges in engaging students are the same across modalities, and what challenges are different? What are some realistic techniques for increasing student engagement? And I want to say, among other things, I am very, very aware of and concerned about faculty workload and sort of burnout, and the potential for a class to become kind of an infinite time sink for all of us, and it can't be that. So I really emphasize realistic, like what can we do? And we have to be really selective about what we're going to do, what's realistic in terms of our time, our work-life balance and such. In what ways can online learning be more engaging than face-to-face learning? I think a lot of people, especially before the pandemic and even now, the default was that online learning was less engaging, just necessarily less engaging. And yet there are many things that I learned teaching online that actually have benefited my on-campus teaching. So, and then how do we faculty stay engaged ourselves? I think that's really important. I think burnout is real for all educators, and exhaustion and the repetition of some of the tasks involved in teaching. We really should be thinking about those things too. So I guess if it's okay, can I ask what the people here think student engagement means, or what you consider to be student engagement? Is that too broad a question? Any of the people who teach?
Hi, my name is Carla. I've never taught, but I always think of it of when the professor gives more of a lecture versus actually having a conversation. So that's what I think of engagement.
Okay. Any other thoughts about that? So, yeah.
Maybe for me, I would say it's students' willingness to participate in learning activities, and also how much their work output kind of reflects their comprehension of the knowledge, like seeing signs of whether they watch the lectures, did they pay attention to instructions, do they read each other's discussion board, and like then do they provide thought-provoking and well-informed responses.
Good. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts about that? Okay, so I think that, like, we all know when students are simply disengaged, that's really obvious. Unfortunately, every semester when I teach a fully online class like I'm doing now, I end up with 2 or 3 students who either never really engage with the class, or they cease to engage with the class after a certain point. So this is, a kind of obvious issue, and probably doesn't have as much to do with the class than it does with students' circumstances. But then when we start thinking about degrees of engagement, I think it can become a little bit challenging for somebody to admit. Okay. Okay, moving to the next slide. So I decided that there are 2 types of engagement, and I'm sure pedagogical theory out there will really dig into this deeply, but the basic engagement is kind of the minimum: getting assignments done on time, staying caught up, passing the class to the student's satisfaction, and graduating eventually. And that's, I think, not to be undervalued. If students don't have the basic engagement, they're not going to succeed in the class. And there are certain online classes that students take where that's really all you're going to get from them. And that's really all, that's as deep as they're going to go for a variety of reasons. Gen Ed courses that, such as Introduction to Biological Anthropology, which satisfies a natural science requirement. That's the student's goal, is to get the natural science box checked. Some students. I have students right now who are taking my class because they've graduated technically, except for that requirement. So it's, you know, I think it's to be realistic, it's important to recognize that that's a goal that some students have, and that's fine for some students. So keeping students engaged at the basic level does present challenges on campus and some distinct challenges in fully online asynchronous classes. So the, you know, especially accelerated 3-week winter session classes or 6-week summer classes where the class goes flying by and the student falls behind. So I would just say probably the biggest thing I've learned over the years is the structure of the class should be as clean, uncluttered, and intuitive as possible. And there should be very clear kind of, this is what you need to be doing when you need to be doing it. Over the years, I've gotten better at that, and I've developed, you know, more checklists and schedules and methods of kind of keeping students engaged. And I'll say a little bit about that. Then there's deeper engagement, and that is for some students. They become really curious about the material. They begin to ask questions that show that they're really thinking and processing the material, ask questions that aren't really relevant to their grade necessarily, that go deeper than that. They're seeing connections with material from other classes that they took. They see relevance to real world problems or to news items that they're looking at. And sometimes it's they disagree, and they have strong reactions against some of the material or analyses or interpretations or approaches that they're encountering. But all of that I consider to be deeper engagement. And what you don't have, that obviously in the asynchronous fully online classes, as many opportunities for students to just spontaneously say, hey, what? I don't get that. That doesn't make sense. Instead, there's a big lag between, you know, communications and so forth. It's just, that is something that's hard to replicate. But I'll talk about some of the techniques. So some of the strategies for encouraging basic engagement. And again, I'm happy to kind of go through some of these in a little more depth, but maybe you all already do a lot of these things. So I offer optional live sessions for fully online classes. That's a kind of above and beyond. It's not required. It's not required of me, and it's definitely not required of the students because the class is asynchronous. But I really kind of started doing this, I think, with the pandemic, because the pandemic confused everybody. And for a while, students didn't know what a fully online asynchronous class was, because their exposure to online learning was the remote style. And so they were saying, well, when do we get to meet you? When are we all coming together? And so I started to do first an optional orientation to the class, which is basically a kind of presentation of the syllabus and the structure of the class. Nobody reads the syllabus. I can't even stand looking at my syllabi. They're so long. So it's kind of, I try to keep it to 20 minutes or so. I invite any students who want to attend to sign in. I say you can sign in for 5 minutes and leave. You can have your camera off if you're cooking breakfast. It doesn't matter. And I record it for the rest of the students. What I find is usually a few students do attend, and there's a few students who really appreciate it. And then other students, if they join the class late or, you know, a few days late, I can point them to that recording. I post it on Blackboard. I then also do live, totally optional live reviews before every exam. Again, that's an added amount of work for me, but it is something that engages some students, especially who are looking for that opportunity to ask a question and get an immediate response. You know, you can have sort of live drop-in office hours. I try that, and often just nobody joins. Students are all on different schedules. But again, any live optional sessions, I record for students who can't attend. So I do self-tests that are just objective 10 questions per lesson. I only have for both classes about 10 lessons, but each one has quite a bit of content. But and I used to make those totally optional and ungraded. It meant that a lot of students didn't do them. Now I use it as a pacing mechanism. So they must do they're graded all together, all 10 quizzes or self-tests are worth 10% of their final grade, but they can take each one up to 5 times and only the highest grade counts. And then with every question, I've actually added feedback so they can go back and look at the tests. And if they got questions right or wrong, I tell them they should look at the feedback, which explains the question and maybe points them to some resources. I found that with those unit self-tests, that paces my students. And I actually do it on campus too. So I do it in both. Students seem to appreciate just something to do that has a deadline. It's low stakes. It's easy for them to get hundreds on all of them. And you know, the deadline is flexible. Like I say, I want it done by this date, but then they can keep going back to it. So that's a very soft deadline, but it kind of keeps them moving along. So I have found that to be very successful and have actually had a lot of students comment that they like that, both on campus and off campus, that they like those unit self-tests. A lot of those questions I also put into the actual exams. So it's also kind of a little bonus for them there. If you teach fully online, asynchronous announcements, I find are very, very important. So I give out, you don't want to overload students with announcements or they won't read them, but I try to have at least one a week. That's kind of like updates, don't forget, this is happening, that's happening, you know, and cheering them on. I do save them all in one file from semester to semester so that I can just modify them and post them. It saves work, it saves some work, and it reminds me of what I did the previous semester. Reminders are, you know, part of the announcements, but I also send out individual reminders and warnings. So one thing I do, if you sort of fall behind on your grading, is I prioritize all the students that don't get something done. So even if I'm not going to get to grading all these discussion forums because, you know, we get busy and I'm not going to get to it today, I can very quickly go through and grade everybody who didn't do it, give them a 0, write a nice note saying, I'm sorry you didn't do this. This was, you know, really important. Here's why it's important. Please reach out to me. If you want to do it in the beginning, I'll say, you know, if you still want to do it, go ahead, but please reach out to me. I want to. So it's a way of kind of pushing the students along that may not realize that they're falling behind. I do balance the structure and the need for structure with some flexibility. I get a lot of nursing students, for example, who work in ER or someplace like that. And I always just say, whatever it is, if you've got something that is keeping you from taking an exam, which I open for 24 hours in this period, please reach out to me. And I generally am accommodating. I'm a little stricter when students just sort of disappear for no obvious reason. I think, of course, it's important to have a diversity of content for different types of learners. So, you know, there's readings, there's visuals, I record my lecture notes using VoiceThread, but I also like to include some documentaries, music, if it makes, you know, for my course on Mexico and Guatemala, that makes sense. Not so much for biological anthropology. These things are very content dependent, what you can do. Accessibility is important. Any way to make your class more accessible is going to be good for all the students. So one thing about VoiceThreads is students can watch them with subtitles. Somebody has their hand up, I think.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So I'm curious, I want to redesign my courses using universal design for next semester, and I definitely will include multiple means of, you know, exploration, like diversity of content. I'm curious what your experience is in terms of balancing the diversity of content and also creating these self-tests, right? Because the assumption is like I want to include, for example, I want to give them options like, you know what, listen to these podcasts or YouTube videos, or you can do the readings. But then how do you create the quizzes or exams if you do, like, assuming that students won't look at every single content type? Do you have any insights about this?
Yeah, so my self-tests generally and tests are based on my lectures, not on all those other folders, because I am like one of these guilty of many folders kind of teachers that, because I get all excited and it's like, oh, here's more content. So what I do is for discussions, that's their opportunity to explore folders. Or on campus, I say for homework, like you can do a homework. If you want to dig into a folder that's on music and art of the border, then you can do that. But I won't test students on that because I know they can't all have done that. They can't have all gone into that folder. So I kind of segment out what I test on, which is within the context of my lectures. Now I've taught these classes forever, so I've had the chance to go back and redo lectures where sometimes what I'll do is have a couple of slides about one of those folders so that they know the minimum of what's in the folder. And if they're curious, they can go into it. So that's what I do. For, students who just who struggle with testing.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I have not had the big challenge, which would be somebody who has a significant impairment for example, a visual impairment and can't take the test. I have not had that. I've had that on campus, but I've been able to deal with that in different ways. I haven't had that for a fully online class. So I would like to learn more myself about, the maximum ways of making things accessible for students. But
one follow-up question real quick. So do you give them option to, okay, this is the reading, right? Or textbook or articles, and this is the lecture based on those readings? Do you say you can read this and then watch the lecture, or, because I know a lot of our students don't read, right?
right.
Long articles, and I can't blame them, like, academic articles can be really dense and there are a lot of accessibility issues, equity issues. So do you give them the option, if this works for you, just listen to the voice threads and then take the test or quiz? How do you approach this?
So I say, listen to the voice thread and then take the test or quiz, because the test or quiz, almost in all cases, every question will be based on the voice thread. Occasionally, I have something like a documentary that is required and everybody has to watch it. I don't test on like a close reading of a text. I just don't think that that's for this level of class doesn't tend to work. I don't think it's fair. So, but I do want to give them the opportunity to, and so I do it through the discussion forums where I give them the opportunity to just go, and I'm pretty like, I give them pretty specific instructions. Go into the folder on primate behavior, the lesson plan on primate behavior, choose 2 folders and write 1 paragraph on the resources and 1 paragraph on the resource, or pick 1 article that stands out to you as really interesting, or 1 issue, and just write about that. So that's it. I have to say that most of my content is, a lot of it is either short videos or maybe an article from the New York Times. I do sometimes put in an academic article, but no, I mean, it's just, I don't think it's realistic. I've been teaching for a long time, and I don't want to give them an article that I myself am going to spend 4 hours deciphering. And we all kind of know what academic writing is, especially in anthropology. Even textbooks can be a real challenge. Just even reading 5 pages of a textbook can be really hard. So I do use open source textbooks that students can refer to, but I don't require them. Instead, I'll require the voice threads, they're required, and I'll require or I will invite them to like explore various folders. And that tends to work out well. I'll explain how I sort of select my topics in a second. So, and then I do want to say encouragement and praise I have found are very helpful, even for students doing basic engagement, because what we as faculty might be a little bit disappointed and feel that students are being superficial for them, it might not actually feel like they're being superficial. And I think it's important to kind of cheer on our students. I have a lot of non-majors. Almost all my students are non-majors. So, you know, now deeper engagement. So I want to start with just, this is something recent, but I now am making a priority, adding content that actively includes experts from a range of backgrounds. And I'll return to that, you know, community activists, young people, people from different ethnic backgrounds, etc. So I have been working harder on that, and anthropology as a discipline has been working on it as well. Seek opportunities for more personal interaction. So again, optional live reviews. Some of the students who join that are just joining for the comfort of getting like, what is this test about? Am I doing the right thing? Others actually want to talk a little more deeply about some of the content. And so that's an opportunity. Individualized feedback, insofar as you have time to do that. Open discussion forums. So I have like one discussion forum, which is just like any thoughts, questions, ideas, comments. And I get some really interesting questions. So if a student has been processing something, they will sometimes go write a whole paragraph and they'll say, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And I really do try to prioritize responding to that. The discussions themselves, I don't always weigh in on all of them. In fact, I don't weigh in on most of them. I read them, I grade them, but I mostly let them kind of roll out themselves. I give students required, like, you must post one original response. You must reply to 2 other students. It's the checkbox. I also give extra credit if they engage more deeply. So if they are more interactive with other students, I reward that with a little extra credit, which some students, it really helps them, especially if they're not doing so well on the exams. And I do think it's a sign often of a deeper engagement with the material. And I try to make the content timely and relevant by including some modules or folders with recent news items or issues that would, this is where I think online teaching is really great, because you can be very versatile, you can kind of pivot, you can incorporate new material that would never yet have made it into any kind of textbook. So I think that's one of the more fun things as a teacher, is kind of thinking of what content would be interesting to students that connects to what we're learning. So if there's any other questions, feel free to just chime in. So actively working to include experts from a range of backgrounds with whom more students can identify. And I just showing you a couple of little screenshots. So in my unit on primate behavior, well, I had the chance to be a peer reviewer for an open source textbook. And they specifically wanted me to peer review the chapter on primate behavior. And one of the questions they asked me about was, how is it? What did I think of it in terms of diversity and inclusion? And my response was, it's terrible. It's, I think a lot of academic fields kind of become very repetitious. They draw on the same experts in the field. And the experts in the field, Jane Goodall, who's one of my personal heroes, but she's been around since, I shouldn't say but, and she's been around since the 1960s. And if you don't sort of actively work to diversify the representation of experts, then you often will, in a field like anthropology, have no representation. So I included, for example, this letter, Sincerely a Black Primatologist, written by a graduate student at UMass Amherst, who is Black and queer, and wrote this kind of open letter to the biological anthropological community about the importance of exposing students to a diversity of primatologists. The evolutionary sciences, it turns out, are, themselves as, this is something that they're working on, let's put it that way. So there's a website, diversity, and the evolutionary sciences, and then there's Black and Biological Anthropology Collective. So I added these resources. Again, these are sort of the folders for students to explore, although I did add some of this content to my voice thread. And I added some notable primatologists, Stephanie Poindexter, who is a Black primatologist, and she has like all sorts of really interesting podcasts and articles, and it just enhances the course. So it's really a way of kind of refreshing the course, enhancing the course, and I believe that students actually have responded positively to this. So I think this is something I'm continuing to do in my classes. It is work. So when I say actively work, it takes time. So you can't sort of overnight, I think, redo an entire course, but you can do a little at a time. And I think that's important. Engaging with students through personal communication. I think a lot of fully online classes have the kind of requisite student introduction. By the way, I should add, I have opened all my discussions and allow students to do video presentations or PowerPoint presentations. And for the student introductions, a lot of students did that. They like doing that. They did TikTok videos and things like that. For the most part, they're still falling back on the sort of usual sort of written discussion posts. I think that's what they're comfortable with, and maybe it's actually easier, but I allow them to do other types of discussions in other modes. But I will return to the student introductions as I'm grading, just to remind myself, what is a student studying? What are their circumstances? In my course on Mexico and Guatemala, some of my students have family members from those places, etc. So, and then I try to, it's a little bit time consuming, but it's not terrible. I try to incorporate something personal for each student in their responses. And just to say, with discussion posts for my 6-week class, I used to do 8. That was like more than one a week, one for every lesson. I now do one for every unit, which is 4. So I reduced it from 8 to 4. I'd rather do less, less is more, what they say, for the students and for me. And so, I think, because all of this does take a substantial amount of time. So, but yeah, I try to like mention, oh, since you're a criminal justice major, you might be interested in this, or I'm glad you looked at that. I'm glad, I hope that this helped you understand the community your parents or grandparents come from, etc. So, and I've heard that students don't read any of comments, but since doing this, I actually get students emailing me saying, thank you for your personal comments, or following up based on the comments that I've given them on the grade. Of course, it's also a chance to kind of warn them gently that I'm worried that you're falling behind, etc. Another thing that you can do for personal communication, if you use VoiceThread, there's a comment feature. This is a VoiceThread slide, so a student might be listening. If they want, they can click, they can put their cursor down here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but they can click and talk and ask a question, or they can click on this text and they can enter a question. So the student says, wrote this, based on this particular slide, made some comments, and then other students commented on that student's comment, and probably down underneath icon. I do try to respond to students' comments on voice threads. Some semesters, students do it extensively, like they really are having, I don't know why this summer they're not doing it. So not sure why. I went back and double checked that it was all enabled, and it was. It's just not happening this semester, but it's an opportunity. I could make it required, but then that becomes really cumbersome. I do think that it's important to realize a lot of the engagement with students, it's the same issues in the classroom as entirely online. The relevance question, why do we have to learn this? What is the relevance? Gen Ed classes for people who teach the Gen Ed classes as opposed to upper level classes. students who are taking the class because it's required. That can be hard. One thing I have tried very hard to do is add kind of some of these folders on recent news, relevant issues, content. And again, I think it's really appropriate for online learning and not too difficult and kind of fun. So I teach genetics. That's a basic part of teaching biological anthropology. And I've added a lesson that's the relevance of genetics. Like, what do we do with all this information? Even the students who don't learn the genetics very well, they often really enjoy that relevance of genetics. And that's, I think, a level of learning. They've gotten more curious about genetics. They may still not quite understand what a mutation is, but they kind of understand more. They know that there's this stuff called DNA out there, and it's on the New York subways, because that sort of concrete. Immigration policy, globalization. I added recently a folder on a particular company that makes candy canes in Wisconsin, I think, but it makes them on the Mexican side of the border in order to take advantage of the cheap sugar that's available there, as well as obviously to save money on labor costs and so forth. And it's fun, and you can include things like links to Google Maps so people can see where the factory actually is, and even do like a little bit of zipping around. So it's a way that I think you can use technology to teach very effectively. Again, I would do it in the classroom as well, but both places I think benefit from this kind of content. Okay. Oh, that's the end. So, okay. So I will stop sharing, I guess. Okay. So that's it. I don't know if there's there's like 10 more minutes maybe. So I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions. Be happy to answer anything. Oh, how do you include? Okay. I saw a question here.
You already mentioned it, but I think you just put the videos there, asynchronous. You can answer that question. I also am curious about the student introductions you mentioned. I definitely try to include those in my online classes, and I'm curious how you have them do, like you said, TikTok, right? Like, how do they share that with the class? And also, how willing are they to do video introductions? Because I definitely experience some, resistance to it. Even like uploading their photos, I'm like, just post your dog's picture, so we don't see just this black box there. So
I do the same. I'm the same way, because I'm very sensitive to all the reasons why students may be guarded and they may not want to share their picture, any form of their picture. They may not want to share their voice. There's a lot of reasons why students may be hesitant. So for the introduction, it's an invitation. I make suggestions about things that they could share with the class. I never grade anyone down. Like, I do give a grade, so that's they do it. Some of them just really, especially I think this younger generation, younger than me generation, some of them are really interested in social media. I don't know how they do the TikTok video. They just include a link, or they somehow upload it. They download it to the computer and upload it. Yeah, I don't do any training or anything like that. It's more like, if this is something you do. One semester I had a student who just did a video, and it turned out he's a YouTuber and he's got a following, and he's a shoe collector. And so he did the video in his bedroom, and then he showed this wall of sneakers, like high end. He's kind of a dealer and a collector, and then he will sell them. And like, it's like a really serious interest that he has, and he just volunteered that, and I thought that was really interesting. A lot of students seem to be happy to share that they're parenting while they're going back to school, or while they're studying, or that they're veterans, that they served in the service. So I let them kind of they decide what they're going to share. I don't push too hard. But I find that I don't get too many just like really cursory, like one sentence type things. Usually I get a feel for it. I do ask what they're majoring in, what they're studying. I don't think that's usually personal. Some students are undecided. So, and it is helpful for me to sort of remind me, like sometimes if students falling behind or struggling, I'll go back and just look at their introduction, and I'll be reminded that they have, 4-year-old twins, and I'll be like, oh yeah, okay. So that kind of thing. Now, including experts in the asynchronous format would just mean finding, finding podcasts or video presentations that people had made. Yeah. On campus, I actually got a pedagogical innovation award and was able to bring people in from Mexico and Guatemala who are community activists, and I videotaped them. But unfortunately, that's extremely laborious. That's really, really hard. I would love to be able to do that always. It's just, that's one of those things that's not realistic at this point, but that would be something I would like to do more of.
I have one more question if no one else has a question.
Yeah, sure. Go
I'm
ahead.
curious if you ever tried, you mentioned balancing flexibility with structure. And one issue I, experience, and I feel like, students miss a deadline and like the quiz is closed, or like they can't turn in it, but I could see they are trying to, like catch up. Have you ever tried like, like flexible, do you do like flexible deadlines? Like I have this idea of, okay, once an assignment is open, there is no due date. Like you're gonna, complete it by the end of the semester. I know maybe this is gonna create a lot of headache for me, but we also need to be realistic about our student population. And I think it's just more work for us to kind of every week dealing with different students. I'm just curious about your experience, if you tried anything like this. What was that for you, if you were to reflect on it?
Yeah. So for me, my policies on deadlines are mainly what I think is going to increase the likelihood that the student will succeed in the class. And so when a student thinks, oh, I'm just going to hammer this all out in the last week, which is unfortunately what students think, some students might think, they often don't succeed. So they can't do it. And so some deadlines that move them through the units, and my official policy is when a unit closes, like we're done with genetics, we're going to move on to primates, genetics is done. Now, sometimes a student will email me and say, oh my goodness, this happened and that happened. And then I will open things up for them if there's some back and forth about it. I never penalize late, or almost never penalize late, say, discussion posts, as long as, because it takes me a while to grade them. So I sort of feel like we should, I should give them at least as much flexibility as they give me. But once I've finished grading and I've already given them a warning, I've already reached out to them, etc. Generally, if they come to me and they say that they're in trouble or in distress, I'll usually say, pick up in the next lesson, start there. And then at the end of the semester, if we want to go back and talk about the first 2 lessons, I'll talk to you about them. But for now, just move on. And the idea for me is always, I really want them to complete the class. I can't deal, I'm like very frugal, thrifty person. I cannot deal with the idea that students spent however much it costs to take one of these classes and is going to get an F. I mean, it just really, really probably upsets me more than it upsets some of them. And I think some of them have, parents that are probably footing the bill. It's just, so I really want them to succeed. And so that structure, again, it is, these are like 6-week classes and 3-week classes. The biggest problem is a student kind of just putting it all on the back burner, and suddenly we're in week 5. And they frantically email me and say, can I do it all now? And they can, even if I let them try, they'll often be failing everything. They just won't it's not giving them enough time to learn the material to pass it. So alas, but I really do try to kind of shepherd them through the finish line. I've lost some students this semester. They're not going to be able to catch up. I don't know what happened. So that's just how it is. Any other questions for anybody? Let's see. Well, thank you for those resources and online. Oh, YouTube channel. Cool. That's great. I don't know if anyone else has any like things that other people do for increasing engagement, like other ideas or assignments at work. I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure if anyone here has taught the fully online class format at all yet.
I teach online in the summer, or one class I teach online, and I do a lot of the things you talked about. And last semester, I also research pedagogical innovation in my research area, and I did some empathy interviews with students after a fully online class in human communication and technology. And they gave me a lot of ideas actually about, like, again, what you talked about, personal relevance, cultural relevance. So I will try more like, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but give them options to even complete assignments. For example, if a student has more, like I had a student who was into video editing, he also had a YouTube channel, maybe he can do like a YouTube series at the end of the semester, product, or another one is a very good writer, so they can focus on. So I'm thinking about giving those like options for like one big assignment. But also I teach communication courses, try to include more like TED Talks, for example, students love. And they kept telling me about podcasts, how they listen, they have more time. So I'm trying to find more podcasts to include, like, so you can learn about AI ethics. You don't have to read this, but the same information pretty much. I guess one issue I would say I have is less so about like that basic engagement, but more like deeper engagement. Like, even though I do most of these, more kind of like student-centric active learning, design and activities, sometimes I don't know how deeply students are engaging with the material. And there is not much we can do about that, as you mentioned. So maybe trying kind of like more like personalized assignments for them, like choose your adventure, for example. Like, you can come up with a project but this is kind of like moving away from more like standardized tests a little bit. So I just want to try different things to see if engagement increases, if it's actually based on, again, students feeling connected to a project. Do they feel like there's a personal relevance for them, or can they translate this knowledge domain or core skills into a workplace skill? So those sort of things, I am hopeful that will increase deeper engagement a little bit, because I feel like they can complete the assignments, but sometimes they're just like, I can't tell, they didn't read, they didn't like, pay attention to the voice thread. So it doesn't really show me that they had good engagement with the material. And you're right, it's much more difficult in online, and after the COVID, it's even more difficult in the classroom setting. But I also will recommend everyone to, if you haven't tried, like using like ChatGPT. I've been trying ChatGPT to, for example, I enter my learning objectives, and I ask prompts, use prompts like to create different means of engagement, and it creates different assignments. Then for each assignment, I'm like, what could be deliverables for these, and create a rubric for that. So I know there's a lot of like fear around ChatGPT, but I've been playing with it a lot too, and to make assignments a little bit more engaging, you know, like, and it does amazing things. Like, it's like creates this narratives. I feel like even the description of the assignments may, from the very beginning, hook students a little bit, you know. But yeah, we'll see. I'll keep you guys posted after next semester.
Yeah, and it's challenging. You know, I like the sort of a lot of it's trial and error, and
Yeah,
then things that work one semester,
yeah,
for whatever reason, they just don't work. It's a slightly different group of students. I've even taught the same classes back to back on campus, the same class in the same classroom, and had very different dynamics and engagement.
yeah.
And all my fellow faculty have reported a similar situation. So I do think things need to get updated from time to time, and then we also have to make it enjoyable for ourselves, not get like be sort of lighthearted about it a little bit, make it kind of fun. But you know, obviously there's always going to be a good amount of substance, but I think sometimes we take ourselves really seriously, and we have to we do have to protect our own energy and like ability to work, you know, work-life balance, because we're all dealing with a lot of different things and so forth.
I like that you included like faculty engagement too, right? Like,
Yeah.
because students, this engagement, I always talk about this affect my joy of teaching, right? Because I love teaching, we're all passionate and you have all these ideas, but then you can engage students, and which makes you feel a little bit like deflated. And but you're so right, and sometimes it's the student chemistry, sometimes just like other priorities, and I think it's very important for us as faculty members to keep things in perspective and be lighthearted about that. I like that.
Yeah, well, I like your idea that maybe the definition of student engagement is if we're feeling energized, the students are engaged. That's like a good measure.
I mean, our students have told a different set of issues and problems sometimes, and you know, we need to be realistic about those issues. And when I talk to students, when I did these empathy interviews, I also taught beacon flex. And it was just so eye-opening to me. Some of the things I worried about, you know, cameras being off or them not like participating. There were so many different stories behind those. You know, it's not always students are not engaged or they don't care because the camera is off. But as professors, we kind of take it personally sometimes, or I need to have that human connection. But it made me realize, put things in perspective. Okay, the cameras are off, but I shouldn't take it personally. They're still paying attention. They're trying their best. And there's a reason why they take online classes or beacon flex. So I think it's important to be realistic about those things too.
I agree. I think that's great. I just want a couple of really quick anecdotes. One is, I once had a student, when I first did voice threads, send me a message saying, thank you so much for doing the voice threads. I listened to them while I'm plowing snow for the city of Boston. That was their job. And I was like, oh, that is so cool. And then I had another student, and this was during the pandemic, probably we all have these stories, who I called on her and she said, hold on. And then she turned on her camera and she was at Dunkin' Donuts working. And she said, but she was listening. She was paying attention. I was like, oh, that's cool. So
yeah, that's why those like auditory, you know, materials are so important. Like, because a lot of our students work, they're like voice threads, podcasts, or TED Talks, you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what I want. That's what I want, honestly.
I know.
So yeah, the world is changing that way. So
exactly.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Amy. This was very, you know, helpful and refreshing.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you all of you I hope I get to see you guys on campus, and that you guys all have a good summer and get a little downtime.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Amy, for your time. This was wonderful. Thanks to participants for joining and for asking engaging questions. I just want to share that if anyone is looking to gain some basic knowledge and skills for teaching online, our team has a course on Blackboard where you can enroll. It's linked on our Teach Online website, and I posted the link on the chat, so feel free to enroll, and we'll be glad to help you build a new online course or get you started with it. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a good summer.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.